And, I'm trying to mix together what I feel are a lot of actually pretty good ideas he had and actually pretty out there stuff that I do not find reliable, and just try to ask, okay, where is the line in the Kantian craziness? Where do you... and so I'm also going to just be talking about the cultural environment he was in and some of his personal excesses and some of the authors who influenced him. But so this shouldn't just be me just talking about this, but also people being like, oh, that makes sense, or that doesn't make sense. Could you actually explain that more? Or could you give me some examples about that or whatever? But I kind of want this to be more a conversation about these concepts. If people at all can participate in that. If you can't, that's fine. But don't look at this as Tony just giving some received wisdom to the rest of the audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So let's talk about a little about the mid-century French intellectuals.
With those guys.
Yeah, well, to kind of talk about the environment that was going on there, you have to understand that they were like the reality stars and rappers of today. They were super important to French public life. Not even entirely in a healthy way, but in it sure is fun to watch them fight way. Right? You chose your sides, you chose which professors and which schools in particular you followed. And not only as you defended them, but just seeing them get in a cat fight was great. And particularly after the failure of Europe, a lot of people felt that European society had just fundamentally failed in World War I and World War II. We look back on it as oh yeah, that was pretty fucked up. Yeah, they had the powder keg. Their perspective was we do not understand the world. If we fucked up everything, guys.
I'm sorry, we're talking about the middle of the 20th century?
Yes.
It's the only mid-century we've had since World War II.
Sure. So people were a lot more willing to talk about radical new ideas or radical new interpretations than we kind of are, although maybe in the next few years we'll have a resurgence of that. And this is kind of why the French existentialists were such a popular movement, because a lot of people really were just fundamentally looking for whole new ways of understanding how the world works, how we should behave, how we fucked up that bad. Much more so than people usually are. And there was actually, and in addition, that they kind of saw themselves as immediately after the Enlightenment, so that they should be building on the Enlightenment. It was clear in the 19th and 17th century that there was this huge expansion of knowledge, and in the beginning of the 20th century, you have Einstein using this amazing stuff, etc. And it's just kind of wow, if only we can take those concepts, we can do amazing things. So a lot of people really kind of tried to take quantum uncertainty and relativity and be because of these weird physics concepts I heard once in a salon, therefore we can say there's nothing in reality we know. That in hindsight is kind of no, quantum mechanics is not useful for determining whether we have free will or not. No, but this is the intellectual soup that they were in. One particularly really interesting thing that they did a lot that we don't hear much of, that you could be really lauded for your interpretation of someone's work, right? When we think of a scientist, we're oh, Charles Darwin wrote on the origin of species. And if anyone's interested in that, you can go read The Origin of Species, and it makes sense, and you understand evolution. For them, their idea of a genius, Hegel wrote this genius book. What does it mean? I don't know. In fact, that philosopher over there has a great interpretation of Hegel's book, and that's why he's interesting. Kind of treating these texts much more like they're holy texts handed down from God, or kind of a rabbinical sense of we must interpret these texts, instead of speaking for themselves. Freud was definitely one of these people who wrote a lot of stuff, a lot of very dense stuff, and people were wow, what does that mean? It's so interesting. And Lacan was very famous for his interpretations of Freud. So a lot of his work wasn't saying, I discovered this. A lot of his work was saying, I read Freud, and this is what Freud actually means. And it was an intellectual atmosphere where people would be oh, yes, that's very interesting. Instead of, no, I'm pretty sure you didn't mean that. That's not what it says in the book. So one of the one of the questions about Freud that kind of obsessed people at the time was like, okay, so everyone knows what for Freud, what Freud thinks of three basic parts of the human psyche are, right?
Id, ego, and the other one?
Superego.
Superego. Okay. And so like, where does the id come from?
Me!
Well,
The history of evolution that, made us apes.
right. Where does the superego come from?
Society.
Right. So the question was, where does the ego come from?
Descartes. I think therefore I am.
The breakdown of the bicameral mind.
I like your answer.
That's an answer, right? But like this is a the other two there are very obvious answers for. This one was like I don't know. It's the thing that says I, me, but like what what in your process as you're being grown from a vat of cells in a uterus to growing up, at what point does the ego come together? Why does it come together? What does it mean? And Lacan first got his first mark by providing an answer to this question that a lot of people thought intellectually interesting, that he called the mirror stage. So Lacan noticed that animals very often imitate their surroundings. And you're like, oh, well, yes, they're trying to be camouflage. And in fact, there was this interesting government study that was very popular then, done by the US government, showing that, like, no, insects that try to imitate their surroundings actually get eaten just as much as regular insects. It's not evolutionary adaptive. Now, I'm not saying that held up. I'm just saying this was a popular piece, a popular study lots of people are talking about at the time. And he was saying, okay, so after you are born, you see a thing and you think that thing is you and you act like the thing. And what you are doing is you are projecting, I am that thing that looks kind of like me in a way that I could believe it could be me. Maybe you actually saw a mirror at some point. Maybe you saw a water, but or maybe you just saw an animal, another animal in your pack or brood. And that was actually his explanation for the development of the ego. That you originally have this unconscious that isn't rational in any way or whatsoever, but it sees something else and starts projecting onto that something else. Oh, that's what I am.
That doesn't seem to answer the question.
Yeah, it doesn't actually explain how one can come to the realization that, oh, there's a Rebecca over there. Maybe I'm the same sort of thing Rebecca is.
Right.
Well, and also why humans have this and animals supposedly don't.
Well, humans do have it. They just don't advance beyond it very much. He's saying animals do perform this mimicry. They just doesn't get very advanced. Right. So his actual claim is your mind starts producing a projection that it thinks it is. And that projection is, in your conscious mind, what starts making I statements and thinking logically, and I think, therefore, I am. And that's not actually you. You are an unconscious self beneath that all. Just like you project the superego, you also project the ego. Specifically, there were three pieces of this that were going on, called his RSI triplet. The initial projection that you're making when you see something is your imaginary ideal. And this is kind of, okay, who are you? Like, picture yourself in your mind. Most of you probably have a picture of what you look like in your mind. It actually came to mind very quickly, even though it's probably not actually based on whether or not you got glasses. If you only got glasses in the past year, it probably doesn't include that. It probably isn't actually accurate about how long your hair is. There's just lots of ways in which it's not really accurate.
It's accurate about how long my hair is.
For instance, when I asked you to picture yourself, you probably didn't think of someone sitting. You probably thought of someone standing. It's just this very abstract concept. We can actually think about it pretty well. It's there, but it's not really us. It's our imaginary ideal of ourselves. The second part is the real, which is what you actually are, how you actually experience your bodies, which is kind of this disconnected sorts of aches and pains and sensations, and like I kind of feel my elbow bumping into something over here, and actually I'm a bunch of blood and viscera under my skin, and like that's reality. That's what things actually are, which do not in many ways line up with our imaginary ideal. So let's talk about this a little more, because people are, being... Let me go over the third one, and then we can talk about all three together very much. And the third one was the symbolic, which was the ways in which we can actually express ourselves and describe ourselves. If I asked you, hey, describe yourself to me, you would write, okay, short hair, no, I mean very short, has glasses, yay, hi, etc., whatever. You could write down a bunch of words, but they're just words, and they're not really fully capable of expressing either what your imaginary ideal is or the ways in which you feel your bodies relates to itself. It's just limited by words. So that is the symbolic. So again, let's back up a little and talk about kind of like how these concepts relate. Like, let's say you're looking at a traffic intersection, and we all have symbolic knowledge of how a traffic intersection should interact. When the light turns red, you stop. When the light turns green, you go again. That is, you can put that into words. It's a fairly simple concept. That is symbolic knowledge. And then, you're sitting there, the light turns green, you go forward, and boom, a semi-truck comes out of the other lane because it wasn't really paying attention, or is it trying to break the light, and it almost sideswipes you. And you're like, oh shit. Yes, there is nothing that actually guarantees cars won't careen through here other than, a couple lights and hoping that everyone pays attention to them. And generally, if you're like me at all, you feel a deep and sudden shock about the world. Not even just like, oh, I almost died. You didn't die, and you didn't even necessarily almost die, but just kind of like the way I understood the world isn't necessarily correct. Loud objects could come out of nowhere at any time, and I'm not really sure about that. And Lacan called that a traumatic encounter with the real. The times in which you've relaxed and you think all knowledge is in the symbolic realm, and things work out a certain way, and you're just reminded, no, actually, they don't necessarily adhere to those things. So it looks like people want to say things.
So my sort of comment to this is, why does this have anything to do with the ego?
So the imaginary ideal is what he was saying, where we place the ego. And the symbolic is the only way we can express ourselves about it.
But I mean, that's true about reality, too. I can express Newton's laws of gravity, but that's not reality.
Right. And there are lots of ways in which it doesn't match up. A lot of these have very philosophical implications, which, is why people are extremely interested.
I still don't understand what this tells you about the ego, as opposed to just, we can talk about the world, and talking about the world isn't the world. How does this place the ego somewhere? Naval, you were saying?
Go ahead and answer that, and then I'll...
Okay, well, so it's not an answer so much as advancing on that. So Lacan felt that a great deal of our frustration, our anxiety, and our problems were about the gaps between these different things.
The symbolic and the real?
And the imaginary as well, right? Imagine you're on a dating website, and it's really important that you find your perfect partner. And you're trying to describe yourself. And you're just failing. You can't, through words, get across what is you. Where the you is the imaginary ideal, and you're just not able to express that. And tactically, this means you're just not going to get a date. But often he would find people in this situation suffer a great deal of anxiety at this gap. And so what Lacan studied mostly is what he would call the lack, or an impossible gap between this is what I know I am and this is what I express and I can never bridge it, and the ways in which this would cause frustration in people. He particularly would call this castration anxiety.
Whoa.
Yeah, right.
That came out of nowhere.
Right. No, definitely. We'll kind of get to why in a bit. But this is how serious he thought of it as, and of course, a lot of these psychoanalysts would try to make more very serious words to try to get across, this is a big deal, guys.
What if you're not anxious about castration?
What?
What if you're not anxious about castration?
Well, he'll be happy to explain.
You can use another term instead, just for you.
Actually, the question I had was when we talk about the imaginary, right? You asked me to visualize myself. And as it happens, I have the ability to visualize things mentally. But I know a guy who doesn't. It's not uncommon. It's a few percent of the population, especially.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
So, like, what are they doing there in the imaginary?
Well, so I mean, it's like saying the same thing that we know people who are good with words. We also know people who can't use words at all. It doesn't mean they don't express themselves in some way.
So what's the difference between the imaginary and the
But what is
symbolic?
Dan imagining?
But
What is Dan imagining when he imagines?
the imaginary isn't just so. One, yes, you have found a good loophole in this.
Right.
Two, I mean, we're not just talking about a visual image, although that's part of it, but just the ways in which you think you know of yourself as a coherent entity that you're neither able to express and you're pretty sure aren't actually real either.
Well, but I am able to express them, even if only to myself. So is the difference between the imaginary and the symbolic that the imaginary are symbols that I can't externalize, and the symbolic are symbols that I can? Because, like, an image of myself is a symbol. It's like some, layout of shapes and colors and whatnot that I imagine in my mind. That's a symbol. It's not a symbol that I can project on the wall the same way I can
Hold on.
project my
A
words.
symbol is something that represents something else, right? So you wouldn't say that a photograph is usually a symbol, right? A photograph is a representation, right? Whereas a stick figure, that's more of a symbol, and there's some spectrum between them.
Right, so where do you draw the line? Like, if I take a picture of something and then, draw over it to make everyone look slightly more stick-like, is it now a representation or a symbol?
I mean, I think a symbol in part is what you use it for, right? If I show you some scratches on a piece of wood, and say these are symbols, right? These are writing. You might say, oh yeah, those are writing, right? But in fact, they just have me like natural markings because they were there's an animal scratching at it or something.
I think that understanding that a reflection in the mirror, for example, represents a human is a thing that non-humans can't do.
Some non-humans can.
Some non-humans can. Crows, I think, can pass the mirror test.
My
Most
cats do
non-humans
not
can.
attack the cats in the mirror, right? And they're not that bright. They're cats.
So I think
Monkeys definitely pass the mirror test.
I don't.
But they don't
Are you
necessarily
sure?
remove a smudge.
Sorry, not all monkeys, but definitely some monkeys do.
Yeah. Oh,
Not,
that's
okay. Send me evidence of that. I'd be curious.
Okay.
My impression. Okay. But I think that the ability to understand that a picture of a thing, even a completely faithful picture of a thing, represents the actual thing, is still symbolism.
Yes, but you don't necessarily. I feel like the use is not necessarily as a symbol. The use is often, well, okay, Adam, here's a pretty picture.
So you're saying that if I could project my image of myself out of my brain onto that wall, it would cease to be a representation and begin to be a symbol because I'm now using it to represent I'm now using it to describe myself to someone?
I'm not saying that.
I was asking.
Oh, I don't think I'm saying anything here.
Okay.
I guess what I'm wondering is when I ask, my friend Dan about mental visualization, he says, yeah, well, so people tell me to visualize a beach, and okay, now I'm visualizing a beach, right? And so then they ask, does it have trees on it? And I say, well, I guess there could be trees, right? Now there's imaginary trees. What kind of trees? Well, now I guess they're palm trees, right? And this, for him, is okay,
You draw out the details before that.
well, not only that, right, but the things are all tags in his mind, symbolic rather than representational.
Right.
The coconuts on the left or on the right. Well, he'll pick something for him, but that's not a feature of the.
Is this
I don't know.
a visual phenomenon that he's I certainly you read about people who don't have visual imagination,
Right.
and that's fine. It is much easier for me to conceptualize someone who doesn't have visual imagination than someone who doesn't have complicated and inchoate thoughts in mental ease.
Mental ease is deeply problematic. Right? What is it that's listening to mental ease? Is that you? And it's thinking thoughts? Oh yeah, in what language? And what's listening to those, right? I mean,
I hope this is what you need to do.
That's great.
So I'm persuaded that there's a difference between abstract representations of reality and reality as you actually experience them. But I'm not convinced that the difference between how you experience it in your head and how you can express it is... I mean, those things are different, but I don't think that they are... I don't feel that they are so different as to be different experiences of reality. They seem like more like there are 2 categories than like there are 3.
Yeah, I'm with the 2 category camp.
I
How about the unexamined life, right? So you of course you make things symbolic because you've been reading since you were a kid, and you naturally put things into words, and you think about how you'll explain things to your students and all of those things, right? But someone who does not go through that mental process, who just sort of lives life as it comes, right? But does occasionally read a text message or something, right? And does engage in symbolic thought of that sort. Or have to balance a checking account, right?
But I don't think the translation into words is necessary for something to be symbolic.
Well, no, I'm not saying this has to be a translation into words. I'm just saying, broadly, someone who experiences life and doesn't necessarily feel the need to, being played over.
I think that's more like somebody living in the real rather than living in either the imaginary or the symbolic.
I actually think it's still living in the symbolic. You're just using a symbolic system that is less easily accessible to others.
But they could imagine, like,
But you can imagine being a person who experiences life as a sequence of experiences rather than as a sequence of interpretations. And it seems to me that you're saying, what if instead of trying to make sense of everything and put it into words and abstract it, you just, experienced it as experiences? And that seems like experiencing life as the real rather than experiencing it as either the imaginary or the symbolic.
I'm not sure I buy that, because I feel that experience itself just necessarily puts on a filter between you and the real. No matter how little you try to, your visual system alone does so much processing on what reality is.
I guess the question
That's true. And that actually brings up another point, which I was going to point out earlier, which is that I'm not convinced. Tony mentioned that the real has 2 parts. There's how you feel and there's what's going on with your blood vessels. And I don't experience my blood vessels. I'm glad that they exist, and I appreciate all that they do for me. But that's a kind of real that I don't experience. And I feel like the difference between, some objective real thing that's going on that is outside of my experience and my subjective experience of aches and pains and, shoving my elbow into Betsy's arm are pretty different.
Do you think that the subjective real is symbolic, or do you think it continues to be a fundamentally irrational thing?
I think it's
Symbols are not necessarily rational.
Do you think it's like the sort of thing that you can write down theoretically and list in a bunch of ways, or like it's the sort of thing that doesn't actually make a lot of sense, but you try to organize it and make sense of it anyway?
Right. So I think that in order to remember things that you experience, you tend to organize them using words, at which point they cease to become subjective experiences and become more what you're calling symbolic. But as you experience them, they're not symbolic.
But also, does the fact that theoretically possible, although I couldn't do this, that you could write down a complete description of reality in some symbolic system mean that it's no longer reality? Is the reduction necessary for it being symbolized?
The question of whether you could actually write down all of reality in some symbolic system is a much more philosophical question.
Well, it's really more of a physics question, like quantum mechanics and whatnot.
So you can't write. I think you would acknowledge you can't write it down in anything less complex than the universe itself.
But it is possible
it's possible you can, because the universe might actually not be 3 or 4 dimensional.
That's a really interesting point.
But that's a lot of physics stuff.
It is.
But there's some subset of reality.
Getting into Tony's opinions are basically, it is true that in this reality you can't do that. That's not necessarily a true aspect of that reality. Also, about Tony's opinions, I largely agree with what you were saying, Elizabeth. And Nunzio. I also think the symbolic and the real are way more interesting than the imaginary. But I'm trying to do faithful reconstruction of his work and not just here's what Tony thinks. But perhaps I am failing because
I feel like these are lenses to some extent, right? So you can say, well, we view things through the lens of the real. Now we're talking about what your body is doing, right? We view things through the lens of the imaginary. Now we're talking about the that's the thing where it gets a little fuzzy. The things you imagine yourself doing, the visualizations you have of yourself, right? Or the symbolic, the stories you tell about yourself. But are they features of the territory? Not necessarily, and that's okay.
And Lacan wasn't even really interested in what those 3 things do themselves, so much as the gaps between them and how that makes us feel and how we react to them.
So, in fact, I was interested in Nunzio's earlier question, which is, if I take my image of myself, standing up, probably with my hair slightly shorter, that I see when you say imagine yourself, and I could project it onto the wall, does it suddenly become symbolic? Like, is the difference between imaginary and symbolic just, can you externalize it?
So we're kind of fast forwarding here through a lot of stuff. But to what Lacan, what was interesting about this was when you do that, generally, or at least as he imagines you would do it, various future technologies, or you can do it if you're like a very good artist or whatever, you become obsessed with something that is wrong. Like, you could make an image as perfect as possible, and yet the human psychology will always look at that and be like,
there's something wrong with this.
That's not right. And it's not even uncanny valley, but even like with stuff much closer. He called that object A. And object A is a thing he wrote a great deal about towards the end of his life. And I think it's actually really interestingly expressed when you look at the excrucians in Nobilis. It's kind of like how they talk about their world.
Sorry, I don't think I understood an object A.
It's a term he made up, so.
All right.
Yeah. When you see something that's supposed to imitate something and you know something's wrong and you can't really.
So like the uncanny valley, but like the uncanny valley elevated to.
Right. It's the disease that people have where they no longer recognize relatives, but they can see them and say that person looks exactly like them, but they're not them.
It is
because
the Capgras delusion.
So. Right, because the theory is that they've lost the normal emotional resonance that they get. Like, normally when you see someone you like, you have an immediate emotional resonance. And they've lost that somehow, usually through brain injury. So they look at the person, and they're like, that looks exactly like the person, but it's not, because something's wrong. Is that the sort of thing
he would certainly be very interested in studies like that. There's also been a lot of writing about transgender people, and how, like... It's not even like you're making stuff up so much as like you'll focus on a really small detail and be like, oh my gosh, this ruins the whole thing. And it's like, why is that detail so important? And like modern philosophers have written a lot about transgender where like someone's trying to pass and people will become obsessed with like, no, you're not actually passing because I can see something in your bone structure that says you're this other thing. And they can't even actually put words on it, but they're
really convinced that you're not passing. Holy God!
Yeah, and not only not passing, but you're evil and must be destroyed because it causes a great deal of internal anxiety, not being able to voice this correctly.
But like people do pass sort of all the time, right?
Yes, they're wrong.
No, but I mean, doesn't this mean that Lacan is also wrong, right? If passing is possible, right? And in general, right? When I watch a TV show, I'm not obsessed with all the ways that it is wrong. Right, unless it's talking about programming, right?
But lots of people are frequently obsessed with the ways the TV shows are wrong.
But you can, it's like that suspension of disbelief is a thing that is possible, and not only possible but common, right? And not only willing suspension of disbelief, right, but unwilling. I look at a photograph that has been doctored, and I am unable to, I can't tell by the pixels, as it were.
Again. Getting into defending territory that probably not the actual
I don't understand.
A lot of the more stuff is talking about stuff we feel we know on an instinctual, unconscious level more than stuff we.
So this is when you see a person who is passing, but for some reason, you can still tell that they are gender X, but are trying to pass as gender Y, and you get super bothered by this thing.
Right.
Why would you be super bothered by this thing?
Well, I'm explaining why.
Do you see how there have been all these transgender hate crimes? People seem to get super bothered by this.
I mean, it seems like they're separate things. Like, one, are you bothered? Two, can you tell if somebody is probably trans? Like, I feel like there are often times when you would guess that somebody is trans, even if you can't pinpoint why you guess it. And I feel like you can do this without necessarily being bothered, or at least without...
But it sounds like Lacan's position is if someone actually could pass, people find that deeply uncomfortable. And so to try to keep themselves emotionally secure, they focus on everything that means you can't pass, so they continue having their nice dividing lines in reality.
Very much like that. In fact, even the Lacanian position is even more fundamental like that. It's like, how do you know that you're a male? And you know that you're a male because of symbolic knowledge X. And then things contradict symbolic knowledge X. And so seeing this transgender person causes you anxiety over your own existence as a male.
I mean, I think it's certainly true that there's anxiety. over trans people, right? Like,
right, but like
Are
when
there
we
other
say
examples?
anxiety about like, oh no, they're going to sneak into our bathrooms and do
well, no,
horrible
but
stuff
I
to
mean
them.
anxiety, like even over people over passing,
Right.
right?
But this is like a strictly visual thing because people are not anxious about people who have, say, androgen insensitivity disorder or any sort of number of genetic hormonal disorders that might cause them to have not fall into the gender binary, or people who are intersex. Like,
Well, in fact, societal overreaction to people who don't fall into the gender binary is actually a fairly long.
but it's a very visual thing, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes, definitely.
It's entirely visually based. Like
Yeah.
there's for example a disorder where someone can be genetically XY but appear completely female their
Yeah.
entire life,
Mhm.
and they mostly present either to a doctor during puberty potentially, or for infertility treatment. They literally do not have a uterus or the ability to have children, but they think they are female because we don't regularly test people for chromosomes.
Huh.
Or
so,
uterus.
Greg, what book?
middle sense. But so are there other examples of this? That like, what was the concept of this?
There are many examples of that. And it's like, I should have written some stuff like that down. I didn't think we'd actually get to Object A.
We skipped past all the other parts.
Well, we can also go back to the post we skipped. That's fine too. I'm just kind of like, is television an example of this?
Again, I mean, like television
Or
about
like
stuff
theater?
that you feel you should know better. Actually, really interesting thing around the turn of the century was that middle of the century was finding out that humans can actually consume television because a lot of people thought like, no, there's no way that would gonna work. Like you're watching a movie screen, and then all of a sudden it's over there. You know, you change shots, which is not something your visual cortex ever has to handle.
Except for all the time.
What? Except for all the time.
Well, they didn't
In
understand
fact-
how your eyes actually work in your process.
Yeah, they didn't understand stuff like that. They didn't understand you're actually putting together the real, which is a bunch of crazy, chaotic images, and making them such that they're like, oh, I think I saw something.
Yeah,
that
you actually
made
have a
sense.
frame rate in your mind.
Yeah.
It's an adaptive frame rate, but it's a frame rate.
Well, no,
It's more than that, right? It's also that you only ever see part of a thing.
Yeah.
Right. And
But we didn't know that at the time, so
Right,
everyone
we
was
didn't.
like, "How even does
Well,
television?"
It depends what you mean by you. Because certainly a lot of the things
Oh shit! This
hit
is getting very
the
laconic.
back of
Sorry.
your optic nerve, and then there are lots of layers of neurons that parse out more and more of it, by which I mean throw out less and less of it. So at some point you see something and you're only seeing part of it.
I think I disagree on the word see there. You reconstruct it.
This is very kind. I still want to know why it's entirely visual based.
Oh, that was your question. Why is visual based? That's a
Like,
good
why
question.
is it that you recognize that you have this experience there, but you don't necessarily have this experience? Well, no, but you do have this experience on the telephone, right? If you pick it up the telephone, you're expecting it to be your wife, and in fact, it's your mom. Whoa.
Do you think it's only visual based? So like,
I don't know. But
yeah, like what if you saw someone on Tumblr who is like making arguments in a voice that you recognize as male, and they say, "Actually, I'm a woman, damn it." And obviously, you're probably not going to react to that because you probably generally don't react to transgender people.
But hold on.
Transgender, I would bet.
I'm looking for pictures of cats.
What?
So is this the way you feel when you hear your own voice recorded
Huh.
Hmm.
and
Right.
hate it?
Well, because it sounds different.
Well, the way you perceive your own voice and the way it's recorded do not sound the same. However,
Yeah.
the way you hear someone else's voice and the way someone else's voice is recorded also do not sound the same because recording equipment isn't perfect.
But the just difference between yourself and others is much more stark.
Right. Well,
Right? If I hear
because-
someone's voice on the answering machine, I generally recognize them. Right? I guess I recognize myself too, but not only right, like it seems faithful, right? You could imagine, like, okay, I'm gonna keep replaying that message on my answering machine because it's my last memory of my beloved wife or whatever it is, right?
It's the
But, like,
recording
recording
as
Yeah.
well as
It's because of
Recordings don't vibrate your skull.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so the question
No,
is,
I'm not asking whether
Why
why
it's
it's true. I'm
Why it's
asking whether it might qualify as an example of this thing, where
Why it
something is
bothers
not
you.
quite right and it bothers you.
yeah, why it bothers us.
Well, so-
Yes.
Have you read the James Triptree Jr. biography?
No.
Okay.
because
Oh, right. Because
So,
of the attention in
But she was a science fiction author who wrote under a woman who wrote under a male name. And people were quite disturbed as this voice, this intellectually masculine quote voice, right, that turns out to be a woman.
Oh God, yes.
Yes, right.
Now, and to be clear, all this stuff about transgender stuff happened after Lacan's death.
Well, right.
This isn't stuff he personally theorized about, but it's an example of people applying his sort of analysis to modern issues.
That's what I was trying to think of. You're trying to find examples from his time,
Yeah.
right? Which
No. Oh gosh. Yeah. Sorry.
I will try to find more,
Read a bunch
think
of
of more examples about
Oh,
the thing.
and about James Tribute.
That is
Talk.
there a case for this in like sort of every
You read the back.
sense perception?
I did not read.
Wait.
I did not read the Jeremiah but I read like.
I mean, yeah, I do not think he would say this only applies. This doesn't apply to blind people, for instance.
So like if you eat what are those things? Miracle berry or like
Miracle
the thing that makes
Oh, that
you
changes the taste
Yeah.
and stuff.
I love
I've
those
never
things.
tried one, but it
Yeah, I
doesn't
haven't.
feel
Oh,
like
they're
that.
great. We should get them sometime.
But it doesn't feel like that.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. It certainly didn't cause anxiety in me. I don't think it's going to cause anxiety in a
No,
lot
It's
of
just like
people.
lemons are awesome. No, that's all.
Yeah.
So it's definitely true that when
Lemons
you
are
eat
so awesome.
something that is almost but not quite the same as a cherished dish of your childhood, that it doesn't matter that the new version is perfectly good. It's awful because it's almost like the thing that you want but not
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, but
This
isn't
is
like
like
a failure of
what kind of
expectation, not a gap?
Or the one where you go to drink your orange juice
And
and
you-
factory-free milk. Right?
Okay,
That's
so
pretty.
That's
Oh,
what
yeah,
I
that
feel like
thing!
it is.
But that
That's
one I feel
also
like
how I
is
feel about
almost.
off-brand cherries.
Yeah.
But-
They'll taste so wrong.
So again, it's not.
It's all based on expectation.
Yeah,
It all
it's,
seems
we're
like
not
a
even talking about
difference
why
between
things are
expectation
wrong
and
so much
reality.
as why it really bothers us.
Well, there's
More
I
than
think there,
seems
there's two
entirely
lines, right?
reasonable.
There's the expectation versus what you experience, and then there's the when you experience something and you notice something wrong about it. You know, that's not the Tony I know.
And also
But
with
isn't that
food-
also just another form of expectation? Just more passive?
and also
Like, I expect Tony to act this way?
I feel like it's a difference between noticing and expecting.
and also with food, it's hard to in smells. It's hard to tell because like we probably have some biological defense mechanisms that are like if something's a little wrong, watch the fuck out.
You might die.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be terrible?
I love this discussion, and I'm going to get into some more stuff, and we can argue over that as well.
Yay!
Though to answer one of your questions about the difference between the subjective real and let's say the objective real, that's a totally interesting difference. Lacan was largely talking about what you would call the subjective real, but a lot of philosophers have thought this is much more interesting in the objective real sense. And particularly towards the end of his life in the 70s, he started talking a lot more about the real. In the 50s and the 60s, he was talking more about the imaginary.
I see.
You're deciding whether or not
I'd
you're
suggest
eyes
that-
or are.
Differences between your experience of the real and what's actually going on might also provide this kind of
Yes.
gap that's painful and
Yes.
uncomfortable.
Yes.
So we were talking about castration.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
right, castration.
I'll explain that. So, getting back to the mirror phase, of the things we are recognizing extremely early on, while we are still even developing the concept of a consciousness. The other thing we recognize is our mother. We are completely and utterly dependent on her in ways that most animals aren't, and so this could be responsible for some of our evolutionary divergence. But just for months,
Wait, most animals aren't, yes, but most mammals are.
right? That
But even
No,
though we're not
Lacan was
not
saying
with
that
quite so
was-
long, right?
Dependent to nearly the extent that humans are.
I mean, the time scale is different.
Yes.
And even capacity at birth.
Well, but like a kid, right?
Or a kangaroo, or a giraffe.
I assume marsupials are more dependent.
Giraffes can walk when they're born.
Yes.
also timescale matters. I think we can just be okay with that. And so our initial consciousness is focused entirely on this mother figure. And it's focused on, is she paying attention to us? Why isn't she paying attention to us? How can we get her to pay attention to us? Because we don't really think of her as a social entity with her other responsibilities or whatever. We think of her as our God, our lifeblood, and either she is showing her attention to us or she is not, and that means something is wrong. This doesn't really have to be about your biological mother. Freud gets knocked for like, oh, you focus on the mother so much. Interestingly, actually, the interpretation of Freud before Lacan was that Freud talked about the father a lot more. One of the works he was most famous for towards the end of his life was giving lectures on the name of the father.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I think Ellie's got it.
And it was
Come on up, I'll be there.
and it was the Lacanian interpretation that actually made Freud a lot more famous for talking about the mother. But again, we're not actually talking about the literal mother. We're just talking about whoever is taking care of you when you are extremely vulnerable, and to the degree you don't really think of them as a person, you just think of them as like a god who is responsible either for your existence or non-existence.
Who formed oxytocin and bonds with you at the right time.
Right.
And a dog then, because dog doesn't form oxytocin bonds with humans.
Probably.
Yeah, I actually understand that is, in fact, how a lot of dogs view their humans.
Right.
Based on our limited understanding of humans.
This is obviously a completely irresponsible notion towards your mother, but you were like 2 days old, so. And he transmuted this into the concept of the other, where like, okay, we have our own psychology about who we are and our ideal and stuff like that, and then the next thing we realize is there is the other.
I think that's backwards. I think babies realize that there's an other before they realize there's themselves.
This is the
Okay.
first notions.
No, that could even be true. I did not actually think about that specific question.
Anyway, but it's not terribly relevant right now.
Yeah.
How could you tell?
But not.
Apologies.
No, it's fine.
It's not supposed to come in the middle of your thing. It was supposed to come later, and yet.
That's perfectly fine.
Earlier is better.
And Lacan like throwing a lot of capital letters around: real, symbolic, and imaginary. He all capitalized. The other, he also capitalized. And so this is our primary social relation, and the thing that implants itself into our brain well before we start thinking of other people as actual things. So like, think of you're at a grocery store and the little kid, your child you brought is yelling, and you worry other people are going to think you're a bad parent. Is anyone in the grocery store actually capable of inflicting harm on you?
Yes.
No.
Oh yeah. Sure. They can insult you. They could punch you.
They're not going to be
like
denying you important resources you need based on the fact that your kid's yelling. But if you try to explain it, it would be very difficult to explain why this causes intense social anxiety. That people will think you're being bad at this thing. But whenever you talk about, other people will judge me for this in kind of an amorphous, abstract way, you're kind of appealing to the other that you implanted as like the God who I am reliant on absolutely everything from. At least this was his own particular psychoanalysis of that.
Isn't that in some sense true that, as individuals, we're not going to get very far, right? Like the Martian aside, right? We depend on our society to live.
Right. But like from a purely cold-hearted tactical perspective, there is a lot of stuff you can do that either people aren't actually going to judge you for because they have other stuff going on, or even if they do judge you for, the impacts on your life are going to be minimal relative to the amount of anxiety. So like an example I like coming up with that's fairly cynical is Republicans and being called racist. Republican politicians passionately hate it when they are accused of racism. It's pretty clear being accused of racism does not cost Republican politicians votes. They're supposed to be very clever political creatures. They're supposed to know what they can get away with, and people will still vote for them. And by and large, accusations of racism don't affect them. And yet, if you ask them what is wrong with the left and what is wrong with our culture, or whatever, they will say their number one problem is people calling them racist. And you can say a lot about the justness of those racial accusations. You can talk about how frequent they are and lots of things. But fundamentally, it's like, why are you so worked up about this? You will win elections anyway. And they can't actually put it into words very well. And if you wanted to flip it around, you could also say about, actual oppressive accusations where if someone based on your race or gender insults you and says you're not capable of something like that, it's wrong. And in fact, everyone you value in your life knows it's wrong. Or at least they would give lip service to saying it's wrong. But you have this fundamental assumption that there is this racist and sexist other who would judge you for it. And if someone accuses you of that, that might activate that judgment somehow. So people really need to not accuse you of that.
Well, isn't it an option? And it's sort of an option for playing out your anxiety because, for example, if people
are affected by racism and sexism. Like if someone says you're not capable, like because you can't do this job because your skin is this color. Like I don't know, people who have ethnic names on job applications do find it harder to get interviews.
But not good jobs.
Or no, absolutely.
I thought that after the resumes were accepted, they found that the rates were nearly as different.
Okay, but
Almost
you
getting
still
the
have to pass
interview
that
from the
first
resume.
barrier.
No, that was not the situation. The situation was when you look at the actual outcomes of people based on their names, right? Then it turned out that getting in the door wasn't enough, right? That actually, I guess.
How the white guys get in the room but then get killed.
Well, no, non-white people get interviewed. If they have a white-sounding name, right? Then they get in the door, get in the interview, but then don't go to the next stage. Go to the next stages.
Oh, this is looking
Right.
at white people.
This is, I think,
or
not a
white
conversation
people.
we want to be having.
Basically,
Yeah.
racism and sexism and whateverism and being called racist and many other things can sometimes actually harm you, no, really for real. But
Right.
but Tony is talking thing.
Right.
So,
I guess in a general case, like maybe it's unlikely, but there are definitely cases where you say, well, you're good.
Yeah.
But actually, that I feel less sure of, right? So
Sure.
let me give an example here. I got a job offer from Google, right? And they offered me X amount of dollars, and because and they said first they said tell me your salary, and so I didn't, and they offered me X amount of dollars. Then I told them my salary. They offered me literally 2X amount of dollars. So how imagining, right, that I had not been previously making more money, right? I wouldn't have known what I was worth, whatever that means, and I would have half as much money. Sure. If I had taken that offer. But yeah. So like, whoa.
I'm not entirely sure,
But no, what I'm saying is to know how good you are, I don't know how good I am. I'm good enough that people pay me X, but maybe I'm worth 17X.
it's totally true that you do not have objective knowledge about yourself, which is a problem.
But also, that's not actually necessarily knowledge about yourself, because that's really knowledge about like the market and other end effects that you
Okay,
have.
but
Anyway,
the
but
original
we're-
question I meant to ask, right, like, is the anxiety that you feel, say someone says you're not capable because of your skin color, right? Like,
Right.
even if you know it's not true, like, having the fear that it could affect you doesn't seem illegitimate.
Okay. To be clear, when we're talking about these anxieties, Lacan thought them as super important, like the thing that determines all of our happiness and our psychological function in life. And like the entire point of psychoanalysis was to try to help people resolve and deal with them. So like the idea that these things aren't legitimate would like just be absurd to him. But like, for example, I don't think a lot of people are approaching this because like, they know exactly how powerful implicit bias is. And in fact, I think we're all familiar with studies that like your likelihood of getting a job if you're a different race of the person reviewing it is lower. Your likelihood of getting a job if you're a different political affiliation of the person who's doing it is much lower. And we hear that and we're like, well, yeah, that kind of sucks. I guess that makes sense. But we don't let it determine our whole world. Even though it could cause us harm. And like, so the question is like, okay, why does this one thing emotionally impact us so much harder than the other? And
Well, we don't mostly depend upon who you are, but for the most part, it's much easier to stay surrounded by people who more or less agree with you politically than to be surrounded, for example, by people who don't judge you based upon your gender or
I mean,
race.
keep in mind that you're also one of the most closely segregated parts of the United States, right? Roughly 10% of Manhattan voted for Trump.
Wow, that high.
and you see,
Well, like
Yeah,
8%,
it's
It seems
right?
like political segregation is increasing.
Yeah.
It seems like political segregation is
Yeah.
increasing in general, and that makes it, whereas gender segregation, for example, is not.
Right.
And therefore, it seems like rationally people should be more concerned about gender-related bias affecting their lives than political bias affecting their lives. But I wanted to say, on a slightly separate note, that of course the way other people judge you affects the way you see yourself.
yeah, certainly true.
I mean,
And, well, this is Lacan's
I mean-
point. This is
I mean,
the right why.
Of course we know that because we experience that.
yeah.
But why is that true?
Because we have justly limited faith in our objective view of ourselves. And we get a lot of information about ourselves from the feedback that we get from other people.
So it's
And
not.
to a significant extent, that's valid.
So it's
There are
not.
lots of things that you're not going to know about yourself if somebody doesn't tell you.
So it's not just that, right? It's like, I can know what you think of me. You can, in fact, tell me what you think of me. And I can be upset about that, and I can know you have a negative opinion about something of me. And I will still get upset if you say that again.
I mean, is it because saying it's an attack on our own symbolic, I guess?
No, so what he is saying
oh,
is...
maybe I am, like someone accuses you of being some horrible thing, you're like, wow, well maybe I am, holy crap, I never,
Well, that is a theory. What he is saying is, because I feel whenever you say that out loud and actually express it, you are saying that and the mother can hear it. And the mother will now like me less and pay less attention to me.
I would suggest that we probably see ourselves as reflections of what we think the mother thinks.
It's just like the Last Psychiatrist when he's like, the ads that say consider your man card reissued are assuming that there's some kind of god who issues man cards.
Yeah, that is actually much more what I'm talking about. Where it's like, there is so much discussion about in terms of social rankings and stuff like that, that always assumes there is some overriding authority that can grant these things to us.
The god who can issue man cards.
The god who can issue man cards, yes. And then and yes, you can in fact talk about how whether or not the person who's hiring me thinks of me as masculine is important to my future earnings. Okay, yeah, there's some way in which that can affect me, but that's not really what we're generally worried about when we're worried about someone taking our man card. We probably can't. And if you ask us about it, you're like, okay, you're right. It was a little silly to worry so much about someone taking our man card. But why do we worry about someone taking our man card so much? We spend so much time worrying about it.
So wait a second here, actually. I think I have another problem with this, right? Which is when you think about how kids talk, right? And compare on one hand how their parents talk, and on the other hand how their peer group talks, right? The peer group has a much greater influence. And so, to me, it says, well, the other doesn't represent, your mother, it represents society. The people you actually have to live with.
Right.
That's
very
also a big factor of age, right? Because, when you're young enough, your society is
Your group is your mom.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but we're talking here about, does this affect us into adulthood? And I would say that the argument that we need this proxy figure of our mother, as opposed to looking at society as a whole and considering that, society, you mean all those people we live with every day? Uh-huh.
Yeah, it seems like from an evolutionary perspective, how you're viewed by the tribe matters enormously, and having
Please don't let me starve, please don't let me starve, please don't let me starve.
Yeah,
yes, exactly. And to the extent that that's not true now, it's only been, well, it still is, but to the extent that it's not, that's a very, very recent phenomenon. So I think caring passionately about how the indeterminate society views you is a pretty adaptive response.
I would say, even though maybe not starve, but how much people say welfare depends on having a social safety net. You're much more susceptible to random fluctuations in life affecting you very negatively if you don't have one.
Sure.
Say people who become homeless, it's very common, just to hear they never had a social safety net or they lost it, and then one big misfortune just caused everything to unravel completely.
So I totally get what you're saying. Also, for what you were saying, yes, replacing the mother with the tribe makes a lot more sense in some other ways.
I think I'm told on that.
But otherwise has a lot of the similar logic. So let's talk about the situation where something's messed up and you did something wrong. You burnt the turkey. You're supposed to make turkey for Thanksgiving, and you burnt the turkey. No, it's okay, Eileen. It's okay. No one's judging you for having burnt the turkey. We're all here. We're having a nice time. And you are in your head losing your shit about having burned the turkey. And in fact, if you were able to take an objective step back, you would be like, okay, if I care about people liking me, the thing to do is to calm down, do what I can to fix the situation, and because that is actually what is much more important to them, that I am a good and pleasant host who they'll have a good time with, and I dealt with a crisis well. Instead, you're like, holy shit, they're all going to hate me because I burned the turkey. Even when you rationally know this is not actually the best way to improve my life outcomes.
Turkey would be really sad. Turkey is a lot of work.
How did you burn a turkey?
Honestly,
This is actually something.
So now, hold on. If someone really screws something up, and then there's really what I say about it, I think, well, they probably didn't care that much. Therefore, especially if it's something like that, right? Maybe they didn't care that much about me, right? You wanted to have a Thanksgiving dinner, but you didn't take the effort to set a timer. Come on, right? if I then see, oh boy, they're really upset about that. Oh, okay, that was probably genuinely an error rather than they're an asshole.
But there's many times when you can, in fact, genuinely see that they're not upset about it, but you're still kind of worried what they'll think about it.
Not everyone reacts that way.
I think everyone. Well,
I think everyone feels social guilt.
I guess I have
Even if everyone in their social group is socially responsible enough not to try to force that social guilt on them.
I guess I had ever had a conversation about people's lack of reaction or lack of caring. Maybe it doesn't happen real often.
I agree not everyone does this, and we'll in fact get into some of why Lacan was saying these things and what groups they apply to. I would say most people experience at some point feeling social guilt and knowing it's maladaptive. Knowing that like by feeling it you're not actually improving your life outcomes, but you're still reacting to this guilt. And this guilt is because there is some other out there that you worry is judging you that is not actually correct about you.
Because so I've experienced this, and in my mind, it's actually a form of narcissism. In that I experience my life, not everyone else's life. Therefore, my life is the most important. And I'm aware that now that I've done this thing and feel bad about it, what would be best for me would be to, resolve it or done it in some way that's good for me. But that's not the best for the social group as a whole. And that's why it's adaptive to just kind of suck it up, deal with it, and move on. But the instinct to
make it about yourself, though.
Right. The instinct is still to make it about yourself. And I think that's a narcissistic trait, not a other trait.
Okay. Lacan wouldn't necessarily agree with you. He threw out the word narcissist a lot in a way that I'm not necessarily comfortable with. Okay. So I haven't been using it in my speech.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. This I want to hear about.
I feel like narcissists, by being used so much by psychoanalysis in the middle of the century, has become a very loaded term now. And so if I say narcissist now, it just sounds like you're talking about a run-of-the-mill jerk, and doesn't actually have the meaning it did back then.
Oh, well, I wasn't using it that way.
Okay.
Okay, so I've got a question.
What?
Is it reasonable to say that Lacan is advancing his own theories and sort of filtering them through the language of Freud?
Yeah, certainly.
Is that why we've got the mother hanging here with the tribe and castration anxiety and ego and id and superego?
Yeah, certainly.
I thought that's
I can't even necessarily say if he knows he's doing it or not, but certainly what he's doing.
it's like all of those idiots who made commentary on Aristotle who weren't actually idiots, but
Right,
all
exactly.
the fucking commentary
But
on
the point
Aristotle.
is that it wasn't actually commentary on
No,
Aristotle.
it was just people putting out their own ideas and being like, I'm making commentary on Aristotle, and you're like, oh my god.
Because the only thing you're allowed to do is commentary on stuff.
Certainly biblical exegesis is like that.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Like, again, this used to be a much more common thing than it is now.
Okay.
So one of the other things that Lacan focused on with the mother a great deal is okay, as a child, the central question to our existence is why isn't the mother paying attention to us right now? That therefore we assume there's always some other object she is paying attention to, and this object becomes incredibly important. If we could acquire the object that mother is paying attention to instead of us, then she would focus her attention on us 100% of the time.
It would not necessarily be positive.
Lacan decided to name this object that mother is paying attention to instead of us the phallus.
And not just the twin brother.
I was thinking the computer.
Well, then he would. That's funny. Then he would associate the phallus with the father and talk about that's why we have envy of the father and stuff like that and stuff. But the point being,
Can I just speak for the room and say this is stupid?
I mean, the wording is yes.
The wording is stupid. He should have called it the computer.
Well, the computer would have required him seeing 40 years into the future.
This is why when they're saying oh, phallic power is so amazing, what they actually meant by that is acquiring the phallus means that God will pay attention to you 100% of the time. Is what you believe as a very
Yes, it has horrible gender politics. We're aware.
Well, no, he definitely felt that this was true for both men and
It makes
women.
no sense.
What? I mean, the Greeks did it. If I kill these boars, God will pay attention to me.
100%.
Right, exactly.
So wait,
Stuff
is
like
the
that.
phallus your
The
dad?
irrational
Is that
things
what-
we do to try to get God's
Whatever
attention.
it is.
Oedipus complex.
Yeah.
Probably.
But there aren't that many disembodied phalluses.
No, but the idea here is that
We all agree that the term is really stupid.
Okay.
Like monumentally stupid.
Yeah.
So that doesn't quite mean that the idea is as stupid.
So this is what you grow up with your pre-rational state, right? This is, as a baby, you think, oh, yeah, mom's paying attention to the phone, I better steal the phone, right?
Yes.
Yes.
What you eventually grow up, right? You stop stealing your mom's phone, right? What like there's some piece of this left behind? Is that
yes.
And what is the adult manifestation of that?
Right. So what Lacan's own interpretation of this, and I might have the terminology wrong since I didn't write this part down, but I remember it, is like you incorporate that more and more into symbolic elements. Where like, oh, she was cared about this symbolic thing, and then I care about that symbolic thing in the future, etc. And obviously this doesn't work, and that there's always some lack, some gap left over. That still, this was the thing mom cared about that I can't get. And Lacan found that this generally instantiated it in some body part that you would form a fetish over. Not sexually, but just like a thing you think about a lot when you see a person or something or whatever. Just like, and a body part you can't really put into words very much to talk about, but just, is really important to you.
Sorry, why?
What like, do we have a distribution here?
A different
Also,
part?
seriously, why? Why a
Can we
body
have-
part?
What?
Why a body part?
Because those were the things you could you notice and could interact with as a child. It was
You
coupled
can
with
interact and notice and interact with a lot of things that are not body parts.
Like the fun.
That's a fair thing. I didn't research that question more in particular. He didn't even say it was always a body part. He would just say it was often a body part.
But
Well, and so
why?
but when we say a body part, right? Are we talking specifically a phallus, or is it like an arm, a leg, an ear?
Yeah, nipple came up along.
Okay.
Well, that would at least make sense.
No, no, that doesn't make any sense.
So your mother's not paying attention to it when she's not paying attention to you.
No,
Right.
no, okay, that makes less sense. It makes more sense as the sign of your mother paying attention to you.
I mean, I also like what? So the outcome of this is you have a particular.
Sorry, this wasn't a thing I was going to talk about specifically. I was just like, oh yeah, he in fact had a response to that. Yeah,
Right.
That's
no,
all.
Okay, sure.
So we're not getting into the fact that this makes no sense.
I think
Well,
we've
let's
already
actually
gotten
get into right now why this makes no sense. So obviously Lacan didn't practice a lot of statistical studies about this stuff. Lacan did not gather a bunch of college students and then see, like fill out surveys about what body part do you obsess about that you can't put into words.
Words that might make it hard.
Exactly.
Well, I guess you start by seeing what body parts you can put into words
Right.
fetishes about, and then you observe the blank space.
Oh yeah, that end arm thing.
Right. Most of Lacan's research, which was true for a lot of psychiatrists back then, was focused on looking at extreme pathological and psychotic cases and trying to see where you're like, something went wrong here. And like, what can we tell about the fact that this isn't working? Yeah, that's some questionable methodology. Yeah.
Yes.
And in fact, Lacan more argued that psychotics didn't have something going wrong so much as they had suffered a traumatic rupture in their life, and that their mind was basically.
Siley perks up just to make another expression.
No.
I mean, I think you're aware that statistical psychiatry has no better track record.
No, I realize that.
This is in fact the part where.
So did he cure any of them?
What?
Did he claim to have cured any of them?
He certainly claimed to have cured and made progress on some patients, yes, and he was extremely successful in terms of people wanting to be his patient.
But not like the real psychos, right? The French intellectuals.
He treated this one woman, Amy, for like 10 years, and then so his first really major case was a woman named Amy who tried to assassinate an actress, and had lots of deranged ramblings and scribblings, and so was put in an institution. And he worked with her for about 10 years, and says that his methods had cured her because they identified what the actress was in her psychology, where she was some image of her own imaginary ideal that she was trying to capture. I didn't break down
And
dates on
so-
that particularly.
And then at this point, some point, has Amy been identified?
So, in fact, Amy's family is quite upset at Lacan. They feel that she would have been released earlier without his treatments. They feel that Lacan took her novel and won't give it back. So it is a controversial case.
I feel like this is like we've heard Amy's family, right? Have we heard from Amy herself? And
let me look into that. I don't know what Amy's own specific words about that were. But we can in fact talk. I don't know if I should be waiting for Nunzio to come back or whatnot.
no.
Yeah, sure. We can in fact talk a lot about his sessions. He became. I don't want to say he became a therapist. Lacan had a lot of disdain for therapy, which is mostly like, okay, yeah, you go talk to your psychotherapist for an hour a week. You tell them how your week was. They say, cool. They give you some closure. You go away for a week. And that's it. You never really make any progress. It just becomes part of the routine of your life. And he just felt that was not what psychoanalysis should be doing. And he was really obsessed with like, okay, how do we make psychoanalysis better? How do we make it more effective? One thing that he felt was, just looking at the entire ritual of the thing, that it's much more like a ritual than it should be, where, you get some closure at the end, and then you don't think about this session anymore. Well, screw closure. He wanted it to be like, okay, you're telling all your thought, one, he doesn't trust the symbolic knowledge that you're using to explain your life. He, in fact, wants a free-flow stream of consciousness instead. And so he's encouraging you to do that, and you're explaining your thoughts. And when it seems like you get to an important point, to be like, stop. And so that your mind was in a rhythm. And this is like, for him, he compared this to like listening to a song, where if you get a beat in your head and you're like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I'm into the beat. I get it now. And then the song stops, and then you can't hear any more of it. You cannot get it out of your head. Your mind obsesses about this.
There are, I feel like, all sorts of ways that songs get stuck in your head, and that is not even necessarily any more one of them than anything else. Right? Like after you listen to Hamilton, all the songs, you listen to it straight through, right? We're just there in the theater, but you're still singing it.
Sure, but you're much more likely to get a song stuck in your head if it doesn't finish than the songs that then, and generally if you have a song stuck in your head, what people recommend is listen to the whole song and let it end. So if you want something stuck in your head, like a psychiatry session, don't let it end, was his logic. And so he would be... What?
I have to stop paying you.
Well, that's the controversial point. So Lacan would close off a session after like 30 minutes. He would, in fact, just not want it to be a defined session, because if it was a defined, you knew when the end was coming. You would have some sense of closure. He, in fact, wants you to get to a heightened climax of it and then cut you off from this session, and then you'll just think about the stream of consciousness you were having for the rest of the week.
Also, he doesn't have to treat you for the full time.
He doesn't have... Okay, so this got him kicked out of the French Psychiatry Association. I want to see, what were they actually called? The Society of French Psychoanalysis. They kicked him out. Because, like, no, dude, you can't advertise an hour thing and then just kick people out of the session, like, within 10 minutes if you're saying they've reached some climax in the middle of that. However, he was also still absurdly popular, and there were a lot of people who still thought these were good methods. And he would be like, and so he went off and formed his own school, which he called the Freudian School of Paris. And which is why it's important to like relate this more to our own kind of modern culture, where it's like he got kicked out of a medical association, is making his own fake medical association. Whereas this is much more like, this was interpreted by the public at least, much more as if, someone was on a record label and they had a major fight over, what the track should be like, and so they got kicked out and they went and formed their own record label.
I think this is like how the anti-vaxxers treat Wakefield.
The Wakefield?
Wakefield's the guy who
Came out with the vaccine autism fake study, right? And all the rest of his co-authors, I think, repudiated it and said, whoa, okay, we screwed this one up. Wakefield has stuck with it, and as a result, he's been kicked out of everywhere.
But because of weird French intellectual culture, this was seen as record label to speak.
Yes.
No, but like people who are anti-vax see it like that as well.
Yes, quite. A second thing he did before I'll get to the question of what did his patients think about this, was like he didn't think your psychotherapist should be talking to you so much. Like it can be very easy to get into the habit of, okay, I'm talking about my problems, I'm going to ramble at you and tell you a bunch of stuff, and then you, the imposing other figure, will grant me the knowledge that tells me what is wrong with me. And he thought the dynamic of that would never actually help cure your problems because you can't actually express your problems in the symbolic. And he wanted you to work through your own problems. So if instead the other in the room was like this dark imposing figure who has the knowledge but refuses to give it to you, is withholding it from you and just, towering over you in a powerful way, this will encourage your own breakthroughs. So this basically meant he didn't have to talk to you during his sessions. So his sessions don't have to be an hour long, and he doesn't necessarily have to say anything. Some people around him were really upset at him, but other people in this room who have sufficient appreciation of human nature will understand this was extremely attaching. There are some people who were really into this. Like, if you do stuff like this where you're just breaking up their rhythm and you're presenting yourself as a figure who's withholding important knowledge from them, some of your patients will be like, this man is a god. Like, it is very emotionally compelling. And, it becomes a question of like, okay, well, is this because his methods are working, or is this because he's an abusive, charismatic authoritarian? And they're like, this is why.
Why not both?
Yeah.
Well, that giving him credit that his methods were working is a lot of credit.
No, but I mean, right? So
yeah, sure.
when you look at are you familiar with the Dodo verdict? Right. So when you look at psychoanalysis, CBT, and the noise.
Yeah.
It's a rattling glass thing, probably that is on top of a thing that is rattling.
It is a glass that is on top of the refrigerator. The
refrigerator is the world's most least efficient refrigerator.
Yes.
Anyway, and drugs, your antidepressants, right? They all turn out to work about equally well.
Right.
Which you wouldn't think that. You would think, boy, one of those is going to work way better. But in fact, right, so there's no reason that Lacan, and maybe this has been studied, and maybe it hasn't, I don't know, right, shouldn't be a fourth, Dodo.
That makes sense. So if your answer is like, well, if you cut off sessions earlier, people will stop paying you, no, lots of people wanted to continue to pay him and became very obsessed with him as an analyst, and his entire school is analyst. A lot of people didn't, but you don't need to get the whole
Can I still go to a Lacanian psychiatrist?
Of course. I mean,
I've never been to one.
A lot, like this. Okay, one, yeah, get a therapist. Two, like this is kind of like saying, can I still go to a Freudian psychotherapist?
Well, no, I know I could still go to a Freudian, right? Sort of.
Well, to the degree that like a lot of the modern psychoanalytic community still has a lot of these concepts.
Well, no, but I've never been to a shrink that midway through my session cut me off.
Oh, that wouldn't fly in America, where the American Psychiatric Association is a lot more powerful.
But I could in France.
Yeah. Well, so in fact, Lacan disbanded his school in 1980 before he died because he felt that psychoanalysis had become stagnant. So I don't actually know.
Also, if he disbands, then they, have the motivation to go out and find their own psychotherapist inside themselves.
Yeah, this was not formal accreditation organizations like we're used to that are going to stay around as long as they can milk money. This was record labels producing controversy. I will research whether or not you can, in fact, go get that sort of treatment.
Not that I want to necessarily. I'm just curious.
There are still many devotees of Lacan in France and across the world.
I prefer the kind who just gives me the amphetamines, right?
Right.
Finding somebody who agrees to not say anything to you and cut you off at an arbitrary point in the middle of a therapy session doesn't sound like it should be difficult to find. Yeah, exactly.
I don't see that it's really have to be professional either. Like you can try to talk to someone on the subway.
No,
say nothing and
but you have a small but very serious risk.
Wait. I thought the power relationship was important. The fact that this person is imposing, right? Like if he could get away with, wearing a giant black robe and like a horned mask, he probably would.
You probably find stuff like that on the subway too.
Right, it's a higher reward, sure, but
I cannot think of the service anyone wants from me.
You would be surprised.
Well, apparently people loved it from the front.
So he also developed the concept of the paths, where again he was very frustrated that many therapeutic relationships would become stagnant, and like what the problem is, but you're just not making any progress on it all. And this at the time was called the impasse. And so he wanted to invent the paths to pass it. And so, just like you are producing a stream of consciousness that your psychoanalyst listens to, then your psychoanalyst would get together with a panel of other psychoanalysts, and they would produce a stream of consciousness that the others listen to, and then they would be able to analyze your problems from the stream of consciousness coming out of your psychoanalyst. Which is to say that your doctor can have sessions about you that you're not even at.
And bill for.
Yes. This is the point where a lot of people are getting off the train. This is the point where a lot of people are like,
wait, but this is like homeopathic psychology. It's amazing.
Homeopathic
Hold on a second here, though. If I go in for a treatment for a broken leg or something, right? I might expect that my doctor would consult with the foot specialist and the ankle specialist and so on, and the
but they wouldn't at the same time be curing your doctor's foot problems. Which is what he's saying is that they are curing both. This panel is curing both your psychoanalysis problems and your problems.
Yeah, that seems a little weird.
Yeah.
Well, but I mean, reasonable. I mean, I'm not actually sure that all right. On the varying levels of sanity, right? It's not like your psychoanalyst is 100%. They're probably much closer to 100% than you are, at least if things are going properly. But
possibly if they're not Lacan.
Paying for professional development for professionals doesn't seem like an unreasonable theory.
But even a professional development that's specifically related to a troubling case that they have on hand.
I'm trying to I guess
it's like a master class, right? You
Yeah.
imagine the expert psychiatrist talking to all of the class full of psychiatrists who are describing the issues that
It
they're
doesn't
having
even
with
need to
their
be an expert. Certainly within software development, it's dang it, I can't figure out this problem. Let me go talk to 4 other people who have no experience with this problem and aren't any better programmers than I am, but just by the process of talking about it and doing it, we'll shake some ideas loose and get some idea of what to do with. Of course, people might be more complicated than a programming problem, but
or less.
Right, depending.
Isn't
Fine.
that also debug your code by telling your rubber ducky about it?
Yes, teddy bear debugging is great. I've heard teddy bear, but yes.
Yeah.
So just a couple more points before I'll draw this to a close. One, another thing that was going on at this time was the Communist Revolution. 1968 in France saw a student-led communist uprising, which you can read about in the history books. It's kind of interesting. And so there were a couple problems with this. One, if you were an establishment thinker, if you were conservative, you were obviously opposed to it. A lot of the communists were actually opposed to it as well, because these were a bunch of bourgeois students. And they were like, well, this is not how Marx says revolutions happen. So we're not going to support it. Oh shit, this is taking off. I have to go do something. I'm going to go join it. Lacan was actually one of the few thinkers that actually supported the 1968 student revolution from the beginning. This got him a ton of passionate following from the students, including the school he was at the time, the second school he was at, because he had gotten kicked out of the first, tried to kick him out and cancel his classes because of his political support of these student rights. And the students took over the psychiatry hall in which he was supposed to be lecturing and demanded that he be let in so that he could continue his lecture. That's part of why he had a lot of passionate adherents and why he was given a lot of credit and stuff. We're just kind of that doesn't actually mean his analytical work is good at all. But in the modern context, you can see that's totally why someone gets credit.
He's like Snowden, right? Where this Snowden did this great thing, and it's not that his analysis is necessarily better than anyone else's. It's that he took the opportunity to be a hero.
Sure.
Or a thief. Or both.
Right.
I don't say hero.
Another super.
I'm prepared to take this outside and fight you over it.
I prefer not to escalate this to physical.
I didn't say physical. I just can't yell really loud.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a better analogy is just various, your opinion on Stevens who, or a physicist who speaks out against Trump or something like that. where we're like, oh yes, they are speaking truth to power, depending on what your political perspective is.
Pausing for just a second here, though. Like, there's something radically different about a professor who's against Trump when 100% of professors are against Trump, right? 93%, or whatever the number is, right? Versus, I'm in favor of an actual communist uprising, which none of the other professors are in favor of.
Also true.
Right?
It's more credit to his backbone, or more credit to him being crazy, depending on how you feel. So, less comfortable thing is, so Lacan was clearly a womanizer. He slept around a lot. He slept with his best friend's wife. He had a child with said wife after the wife was separated from her husband, but not when he was separated from his wife, etc. There's a lot of accusations he slept with his patients and slept with people who were close to his patients, manipulated his patients into letting him sleep with them.
Did they have orgasms?
What? I don't know. I'll look that up.
Sorry, his therapeutic technique really sounds like they wouldn't.
Oh, I see. Quite. Yeah. That's terrible. I could go into more of his what I would think his psychology would say about that, but there's not actually much backing for this. Certainly, people can discuss that offline if they want to more, but
you mean the accusations for sleeping with his patients? There's not much backing for that. The fact that he was a womanizer.
Oh my gosh, no one talks productively about this. The followers of Lacan are completely uninterested in his personal life and will not talk about it at all. The enemies of Lacan will accept any piece of gossip or speculation of he talked about sex with women a lot, ergo.
Right.
And it's just like, can someone bring up a patient who said, yeah, he slept with me? Right? And that is just not.
Well, as soon as you find one, you'll find 15 more.
Almost
given how these things tend to work.
And so it's hard to say that. I would not want to say he definitely didn't, and I wouldn't want to say he definitely did. And it's weird because you're like, oh, well, personal behavior shouldn't be tied to the validity of theories, but that sounds terrible. Anyway, he was also really obsessed with mathematics. He thought mathematics could really lead the way in psychiatry in kind of an uneducated way, where he heard about knot theory, and he was like, maybe the ego, the ideal, and the real are all wrapped up in a knot, and that will help you visualize it. He was also really, really interested in topology, so I'm sure if we asked Kristen in a couple weeks about how her topology relates to Lacan, she'll be delighted.
I'm sure.
He would in fact, he was very famous for making pretty graphs to explain.
Looks very Kabbalistic.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Which I thought was interesting. I was going to go over it if I did not have enough material to take up the time, but I think I have gone long enough. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Tony. This is fantastic. Sorry, I'm sort of clapping O'Reilly's back.
Okay. Doesn't look like it was fantastic to Eiley, but I'm glad everyone else enjoyed it.
Well, that's why she was clapping quietly.
Aw, you're very nice, Eiley. We like you. I'm sorry. I appreciate that you have rigor in science, and don't like people who have none.
Eileen, we think it's really cool that you went to all the effort of making a turkey.
I didn't make the turkey. I burned the turkey.
You made it.
Yes, but
how much of the actions that we take in a social context are about the signifier, and how much are about the result?
That is a very Lacanian question.
Yeah.
It's
not even a question.
When Tony talks about Lacan, he uses words like signifier a lot.
Yeah.
Wait, did we use it?
I did not actually use it, but
No, I've never burned a turkey.
I mean, when talking about the symbolic, the term is the signifier.
Yes. No, I mostly know adjacent conversations with Tony where he's mentioned Lacan and then gone on about the signifier a lot. So now I'm like, the signifier, that must be Lacan.
I wrote an amusing thing lately where the S in David S. Pumpkin stands for signifier without the signifier.
Right.
You okay, Eileen?
Yeah.
All right. Cool.